So welcome to the tilt or the depth illusion. So for simplicity's sake, I'll just call it the tilt because that's what most magicians actually call it in the modern era. And honestly, yeah, it's just a shorter word, so yeah. But the tilt is actually a move that allows you to control the selection to anywhere near the top of the deck. And it was a move popularized by Ed Marlowe. But as we've come to know, just because you popularize something doesn't mean that you've created it. And as we come to know on this channel as well, magic history is kind of a pain because it's never like a linear path. It's usually a culmination of a lot of lineages that lead to this one singular point. And the tilt in this case is sort of the same way, but let's discuss that more in the history section. So this will be somewhat of a long history segment, but I'll try and go in chronological order. There will be some bits here and there that are missing, but I'm just here to note the main parts of what makes the tilt what it is today. All right. So our first piece actually comes from Kartenkunst. I think that's how you pronounce. I still can't pronounce it. It's a German magazine, anyways. So that's from 1910, and it was from Johann Nepomuk Hofzinser, which is not really surprising to a lot of people, I guess, by this point. But it's an unnamed move, and in the Samuel Henry Sharp translation of the book, which is Hofzinser's Card Conjuring back in 1931, I'll just read you a brief passage of what the move actually is actually described as. Quote, "The forgotten one goes back into the pack. This card is put into the pack under the top card," unquote. So that's the first instance, I believe, that we have of a card being inserted into the second position, which is sort of interesting because, well, the description is sort of vague, but as far as we can tell, there's not really any sort of depth illusion or any sort of like perception illusion given to the move. It's just a direct insertion into the second position, which is sort of interesting. But anyways, let's move on to our next entry into the tilt lineage. This comes from an unnamed move by Bernard Marius Cazeneuve back in 1913. He actually published this in a French periodical magazine called L'Illusionniste, which is a translation for The Illusionist, which was started by Jean Caroli. And yeah, it's an unnamed move, but you know, it does sort of share the same mechanics as our modern day tilt. I just cracked my finger, ow. But our next modern iteration, I would believe that actually led to our modern tilt, comes from Further Magic of the Hands by Edward Victor, published back in 1946. So this is an unnamed sleight, and unlike the modern tilt, it's actually done from the front of the deck, which is sort of interesting because you don't really see that nowadays. You just see the tilt done from the back. But this sort of tilt is actually called a frontal tilt or a tilt up front. So this is where history starts becoming a bit more, let's just say muddied, because now we're going into the depth illusion by Dai Vernon. So Dai Vernon actually never really gave it the name depth illusion. Depth illusion was a name given to the move by Conrad C. Bush, which is sort of interesting, but anyways, Dai Vernon actually never really formally published this. This was actually published in Paul Bearer's Review Volume 10 by Carl Folds back in 1977. So it is a pretty recent move because it's been like, what, less than 50 years since it was last published. But Dai Vernon actually developed this move while he was playing around with Edward Victor's move in the mirror. So that's an interesting thing. So there's this interview with between Ken Prinzel and Dai Vernon. So I'll just read you a quick passage. So Ken Prinzel asked, "Who or what inspired you?" Dai Vernon says, "The idea came to me after studying a photograph in Edward Victor's book," unquote. So this was actually stated in Flashpoints by John Racker Baumer, which you can still buy as an ebook, so I highly encourage you to do so. But this is interesting because, well, it states that, you know, Edward Victor clearly predates Dai Vernon. But what about the man who gave tilt its modern name, Ed Marlowe? So Ed Marlowe published Tilt in a booklet called Tilt with an exclamation point back in 1962. Now you might be wondering why I actually placed Ed Marlowe after Dai Vernon, even though Dai Vernon clearly published it after Ed Marlowe. Well, it's actually because Divernon showed this move around to other people way before it was actually published. So I'll actually just state you a passage from the original Tilt manuscript, and you'll see what's really interesting. So, quote: "In the usual procedure of establishing my notes with other reputable cardmen, I was informed that Divernon had independently thought of the single card tilt and also preceded me by several months." Unquote. So Marlowe clearly acknowledges that Divernon created the move before him, but Divernon also acknowledged that Edward Victor created the move before him. So it is sort of interesting to sort of see that now we have an actual lineage to trace back to. We have Ed Marlowe and Divernon, who independently created this, who both sort of, I wouldn't say Ed Marlowe actually went to Edward Victor. Divernon went to Edward Victor, and Ed Marlowe actually traced back to 3 different other magicians, which I won't go into because that's a whole other ballpark. But it's sort of funny because I still see people actively, fighting on who actually created who created what. Because I still see like, oh no, Edward Victor, nah, he published his manuscript way too late, and then it was all like, I don't know, it's just like all a mess. But it's funny because the creators have given their definitive answer as to who or what inspired them, right? So it's just silly, but that's it for the history section. It's relatively interesting, I'd say, because tilt is a relatively well documented move throughout history. So yeah. So without further ado, let's go into the Edward Victor tilt, which was published back in Further Magic of the Hands by Edward Victor. So this is what we call a frontal tilt, or a tilt up front. I actually quite like this tilt, and I'll tell you why after I explain the mechanics of the move. So you're first going to have a card selected, so in this case it's the 9 of hearts. Actually, you know what, I'll use a different card, so the 2 of hearts, let's just say. Alright, you're now going to grab the card by the upper right corner over here. And obviously, if you have a card selected from a spread, you just grab it, so you're already in position. Alright, so we're going to grab the card by the upper right corner, and now your left hand is going to bend the deck into an upside down U shape. So it's basically going to do this, right? And the way that you're going to do that is you're going to wrap your middle ring and pinky finger around of the deck until the pad of your fingers are touching the face of the deck, like so. Alright? Your left thumb contacts around the top left corner of the deck and applies downward pressure. Alright? The book tells you to curl in your index underneath of the deck to apply upwards pressure, but you can actually apply that pressure with the 3rd phalanx of the finger as well. So you can use this part to push upwards on the deck, which will cause it to bend upwards regardless of whether or not you have your finger curled, right? So I mean, it really doesn't matter. You can curl in your index and push upwards, or you can use this part to push upwards. It really doesn't matter, right? So as long as you get this U shape, it will be fine, all right? So these fingers are pulling downwards and your thumb are pulling downwards while your index is pushing upwards, all right? Now, what you're going to do is that you're actually going to lower your thumb in the deck, which causes one card to actually pop away from the deck. All right, so you can see here, if I just lower the deck, it'll actually riffle through one card and cause this card to pop away from the deck. All right, now what you're going to do is that you have your selection here, and you're going to insert this card into this space. All right, and what you'll notice is that my right hand actually covers this side of the deck where there's the least amount of pop space, because if you actually remove this card, you can see that over here this part is still flush with the rest of the deck, which means that there's not really any sort of depth illusion. It's just sort of flush with the deck, right? So the fact that your right hand is here means that now you have a cover for this for these fingers, for this half of the deck. So when you slip this card into this space, it'll look like it's actually going into the center of the deck, but it's actually just in this space. All right. So now when you insert this card in and you square everything up, now you can just relax your hand, and that's going to be it. You've completed the move. So here are a couple of tips for the Edward Victor frontal tilt, because there's not really much that goes into it. You're going to need to turn your body to the left to cover some of the angles, because if you do it the same way as a normal tilt and you show this to people, well, first off, this looks really stupid and people will see what you're actually doing. So you're going to have to turn your body to the left and show them this, where you can see the card going into the center of the deck if my camera would focus, but yeah. So you would turn your body to the left and you would see this, right? Where you can see like some sort of shadow over there, almost as if it was actually, there we go. Almost as if it was actually in the center of the deck, but it's actually just right there, all right? But what's really interesting about this move is that I actually quite like this, is that you can actually invite people to actually look over your shoulder. So you can say something like, it's rare that people get to see things from my perspective, a magician's perspective. So this move actually looks phenomenal over the shoulders. So if you just do this, and you just did the tilt as per usual, here you can see that this is actually a pretty good angle for the move, which means that if you invite people to look over the shoulder, this also still looks good. Alright, so when you push everything in, you have no issues with the move. I mean, it's obviously kind of obvious with the white bordered card, so I'll do it with something that's sort of the same, right? We have this, and then you push everything in, right? So that's something that I really like about this tilt. You have the opportunity to sort of invite people to go over your shoulder and just look at it, because that's something that most people don't get the opportunity to, right? They're probably like, man, it probably only looks good from like the front. I wonder what it looks like from the back or whatever, right? Because some people are curious about that. But you know, this is one of those rare moves where I think it actually looks better over the shoulder. So because if you think about it, if you turn your body, that's quite bizarre. But if you do it from this side and people are looking downwards over your shoulder, I think it actually looks quite nice. So yeah, that's just a tip and some handling bits regarding the Edward Victor frontal tilt. So now we're going into the depth illusion as it was published in Karloff's The Pallbearers Review Volume 10, with some additional details from Ed Marlowe and also a couple of personal touches that I think that Ed Marlowe or Dai Vernon didn't really mention, but it's just, you know, it's there, all right? So what you're going to do is that your selection starts off on top of the deck, which is sort of interesting because usually for modern iterations you don't really see this, but anyways, it starts off on top of the deck. Next, you're going to get a pinky break underneath of the top two cards. So you have the selection and then one indifferent card over here. So you can use a pinky count or whatever is your preferred method. As long as you get a pinky break, it really doesn't matter. Next, your right hand is going to go over the deck and it's going to grip the deck in a biddle grip. So you have both a dealer's grip and a biddle grip at the same time. But what this allows you to do is that now, if you just relax the fat of your thumb over here, this side actually pops up a bit, which now means that when your right hand goes over, you can transfer this pinky break to a thumb break. So now these two cards are held by your thumb rather than your pinky, all right? And now this is the most important part, and they actually stress this in the books, where your right hand does not move. These two cards do not move. People think of the tilt as an upward lifting action, but that's not true. It's actually a downwards action, which is sort of interesting. So these two cards do not move. your right hand does not move. Think of it like a cover pass. The cover cards are not supposed to move at all because everything happens underneath of it, right? So what happens is that your left hand actually bends downwards, sort of like a hinge. So it rotates around the front edge of the deck. So if it's like this, so this is just a depiction, so it just opens up like so. Alright, in a sort of V shape, like so. Alright, obviously I'm exaggerating it just for explanation purposes only. In reality, it should be something more like this, right? It's a very like slight change. Alright, so now what's going to happen is that your left thumb and your middle fingers grip the deck and double near the top left corners. It's actually slightly below of the top left corners, but it's these fingers that maintain the general angle of this double over here, right? Because if I actually pry it open, these fingers actually keep the same angle. All right, so these cards maintain the hinge angle, if that sort of makes sense. All right, so now once you have the general angle of the card down, you're going to insert the fat of your thumb and the pinky into the gap in between of the deck and the two cards. And now when you relax your hand, these two cards are actually going to rest on top of the fat of your thumb as well as the pinky. And it's just going to rest there. You don't even have to push upwards on these two cards. They're just going to rest there. Alright? And now what you'll notice is that because these two are at a relatively equal height, this allows for a nice and flat tilt position, right? You won't get something like this. So now what's really interesting about this position is that you're already primed for a tilt. So these middle ring and pinky finger actually act as cover for the right side of the move. The thumb, on the other hand, acts as cover for the left side of the move. So you can see that the thumb is actually straight and it lies on the left long edge of the deck throughout the entire, long edge, right? So you can see that this is perfectly covered. You won't get that with this side, so you might want to, depending on how you handle it, you might want to do it from more of a left side, right? So just be aware of this angle over here, right? And now your right hand releases the deck. So everything I just told you actually happens underneath of your right hand. All right. Now, once your right hand is has released the deck, you'll use your right index to actually push this selection forward. And you'll notice that this is a very particular location for me to push a card forward because I don't want to push this card forward over here. If I push the card forward over here, it will bend the card, and I don't want that because you can actually see the lighting and the shadows of the card actually change if this happens, and also you can see it warp. So I don't want that to happen, so I want to push the card from here, and I don't need to apply any sort of pressure. I just do it from pure friction. So I just move my index forward, and by extension this card goes along with it, causing it to go into an up jog. So now what you're going to do is you're going to take the card with your right hand, thumbs up and palm downwards near the top left corner. So over here. Alright. So now when you take this card, you can actually display it. Right? So you take this card, you can display it however you want. And now when you place this selection back into the deck, what you can do is that you're actually just going to turn your hand back with the thumb upwards and the fingers downwards, like so, which allows you to actually just slip this card into the gap between the deck and the card, like so, right? So what's really interesting is that you shouldn't actually have the selection be touching the deck over here. It should actually be sort of floating in between of the space. It should not be touching it, and I'll tell you why it should not be touching it in just a bit, alright? So you continue to push the card in, and once the card is flush with the front of the deck, so it's pretty much flush, you're going to collapse the break and drop the selection at the same time. And as both cards actually just fall, you're going to stick your pinky as they fall into the gap, which allows you to get a pinky break below of the selection, as well as the top card, as well as the top indifferent card. So now you're in a prime position to do a double lift or a double turnover to reveal that the card has gone back to the top. And that's the depth illusion or the tilt, which both actually use the same mechanics and have the same general handling. So now we can get into a one-handed get ready from Card College Volume 4 by Roberto Giobbi. So what you'll notice from the normal, well, actual tilt handling is that you need two hands for everything, right? You need two hands to get into proper position, into proper tilt position rather, which isn't ideal because sometimes you want to do something else. So there are quite a few one-handed get readies, but this is the more common one, right? So what you'll do is that you're going to get a pinky break below of the top card if the selection is elsewhere, or below the top two cards if the selection is on top of the deck. I'll just do it with one card just because it's how I do it, but you know. So what you're going to do now is, once you have your pinky break, you're going to pin the area near the top corners of the deck with your thumb and middle finger. So it's the same thing as before, where you sort of want these fingers to be there to maintain the general angle of this card over here. Alright? Next, you're going to relax the fat of your thumb, which allows this card to pop free away from the deck. So now this card is lifted off from the back. Alright? And while maintaining the pressure on the front of the deck, you're going to lift the card upwards with your pinky and ring finger until it lifts somewhat above the fat of your thumb. So it's just going to be pushing upwards, like so. And now once it's above the fat of your thumb, you're going to actually just stick the fat of your thumb into the gap, which allows this card to just lay on top of it. Alright, and your fingers, your left ring finger and your pinky finger are just going to relax. Alright, so now this card is in the same position as before. It's laying on top of the fat of your thumb and your pinky finger, while the front of the deck is being pinned down by your middle and your thumb. So you're in the same exact position as before. It's just a different way to get into this tilt position. Alright. So here are just some general handling tips, or just how you would handle the move. So for the two-handed get ready, you would usually have the card actually selected from a dribble or from a spread. And the reason why is because you have a messy deck after those two actions, which is good because you know, you need a way to justify why you have two hands on top of the deck. Because if you just have like, I don't know, a squared up deck and you just have two hands on top of it, that looks quite odd. But if you have a messy deck, now you have the perfect excuse for why your two hands are together, because you need two hands to square up the deck. So under the guise of, after cleaning up a spread or a dribble, so under the guise of squaring up the deck, you're just going to get into prime tilt position, like so. Alright, so that's just a basic handling thing. Alright, so you need justification as to why your two hands are together. For the one-handed get ready, you can drop your hand off to the side as some sort of like moment of relaxation, and during that moment you can just show the card to your spectators, right? Or you can have them, you know, touch a card, and as they show the card around, you just relax your hand and just wait for them to be done showing the card around, alright? So the tilt as a whole should be done very nonchalantly and be done relatively quickly, as in don't dwell on the fact that you're putting the card into the deck, because sometimes I see people like, yeah, this card is actually going to the center of the deck. Look at how convincing this is. And it's like, no, it's really not. So it should just be one smooth motion of, yeah, this is your card. Here, I'm just gonna slip it into it, and that's it, right? So yeah, that should just be some general handling tips on the tilt. So here are a couple of convincers to make the tilt a bit more effective, because people actually say that just doing the tilt is not necessarily the best, but once you add subtleties, once you add some convincers, now there's some layers that actually convince people that this card is actually going into the center of the deck. So these are just a couple of convincers that other people have made. So this is from Howard Schwartzman and Charles Ast Jr. Well, they both published it independently, but you know, they both published the same subtlety. So what you're going to do now is that you're going to use the selection, so you're already in tilt position, you're going to use the selection to actually poke out a couple of cards from the center of the deck, like so. Alright, so you're going to apply a bit of pressure with your fingers to bend the card, allowing it to be in a sort of U position. And now you're going to move your left index out of the way from the front edge of the deck, which allows you to just, you know, if you actually just poke this card into the center of the deck, this shoots out some cards from the front of the deck, which makes it seem like, oh yeah, I'm actually putting some cards in the center of the deck. And after you're done poking a few cards from the center of the deck, you're just going to slip it into the tilt position. Alright? So it's the same thing, except that you just poke a few cards from the front, right? So I actually don't really like this convincer because, well, how thick is a card, right? Realistically, how thick is a card for you to actually just poke so many cards out? Because like you're able to just slip this card so easily like anywhere else, but you're struggling with putting a card into the deck and you're kicking cards out? You're kidding me, right? So I don't like this subtlety because it seems like it's like you're making such an easy thing so difficult. So I just don't like this subtlety at all. All right, so yeah. And also the reason why I actually bend this card is because bending this card actually creates a bit more surface area. So it actually just, instead of just slipping into the deck, it now clashes with the deck. All right, so that's why I bend this card just a bit. All right. Anyways, I don't like this convincer at all. So the next subtlety comes from Ed Marlowe, which he published back in 1998 in Onyx issue 2. So you have an indifferent card injogged in advance. So what you're going to do is that you're going to insert your pinky anywhere near the deck, and you're going to go into a deep pinky break. So you basically just stick your entire pinky in there until the pad of your pinky is now inside of the deck. And now you're going to pull the card directly backwards, allowing you to get an in-jog. So that's just the simplest way to get an in-jog. Alright, so the subtlety is you might have to tilt your hand upwards a bit to not flash the in-jog card. So now what we're going to do is that after you execute the tilt, you're going to show that your card is still sticking out from the back. So you're going to do this. You're going to insert the card. I'm not actually doing the tilt. So you're actually going to insert the card, and then as you insert the card, you're going to slowly lower your wrist and display the in-jog card. So it's like this card is genuinely from the center of the deck, and you can square everything up, and now it makes it seem like, oh yeah, the card did did come from the center, did actually go into the center of the deck. I just saw it getting squared up. So that's just a brief convincer by Ed Marlowe. The next subtlety is from Tommy Tucker from What Next back in 1936. So this was actually originally used for a bluff shift, but I kind of found it applicable for a tilt as well. So after you're done squaring the selection for a tilt, your right hand actually continues to move forward and grips the deck in a biddle grip. Now it picks up about half of the deck and you just dribble the packet in your right hand. So it's almost as if you inserted the card and then you're just dribbling everything on top of the selection, like so. So I just found that sort of interesting. I mean, I guess in the long term it wouldn't make sense for you to just push a card in and then just grab everything on top, but you know, I think there's it looks interesting enough. But that's a subtlety by Tommy Tucker. And next we have a convincer by Daryl Martinez, who published this back in Hierophant 1980, and it's called the Convincing Tilt. This is probably one of my personal favorites, and yeah. So you're going to have the tilt exclusively supported by your fingers and no longer with the fat of your thumb, right? So usually, with this card, you would have this card resting on top of the fat of your thumb as well as your pinky. Here, you're going to have to remove the fat of your pinky. Alright, but you don't want this level to change, right? So you sort of want your fingers to grip this tighter. And now what's going to happen is that your left hand is actually going to tilt upwards. So usually this is the normal, sort of normal tilt angle. Your hand is going to tilt upwards, and as you tilt upwards, your left thumb is going to lift up about half of the deck, allowing for a gap to form, almost as if you're going to do a Charlier, right? And now, as you do that, you're going to slip the card into the tilt position. And once the card is slipped into the tilt position, you're just going to relax your thumb and allow these two packets to form once more. So it's going to slide into the tilt gap as it just closes, alright? So now, it looks like you slid this card into this gap, when in reality, you actually just slid it into the tilt position, like so, alright? And now you can just square everything up, and that's the convincer. It is such a nice convincer because it genuinely looks like you are slipping it into the deck, when in reality it's actually just going into the tilt gap. So that's just a convincer by Daryl Martinez. And again, the entire action should be a lift upwards, open, and then you settle everything back down. So let's talk about the external reality of the tilt. And you know, everything just makes sense with the tilt. You have to reinsert the card into the deck so that there's magic. It's a natural process for most card effects, right? So as an external reality, it just makes sense. What you have to be careful of is overproving. You don't have to try to convince people over and over and over again that the card is really going into the center. If you just use one of the subtleties or one of the convincers, it will work tremendously fine. So don't try and make this like a game of, look, the card is really going to the center of the deck, because, you know, overproving turns out to not really be the best tactic for Magic in general. So, you know, you don't have to overprove. You just have to, you know, use the convincer and then just let everything go naturally. So that is the tilt and its external reality, which just makes sense. So the tilt is, there's a lot of things regarding the tilt, but, you know, I'll gladly lead you to some resources where you can learn more about the tilt. So there's Flashpoints by Ed Marlowe, written by John Recker-Baumer. Back, it's an ebook, so yeah. I think most of the resources in this are going to be an ebook, because older Magic books are kind of hard to find. So, you know, there's your only option is either to buy them in the resale market, which is slightly more expensive, or you can just buy them as an ebook to make them just cheaper. So, Flashpoints by Ed Marlowe, written by John Rucker-Baumer. Hierophant, written by John Rucker-Baumer. That's an ebook again. The Legendary Kabbalah by John Rucker-Baumer, an ebook. The Card Classics by Ken Krenzel. The Card Classics of Ken Krenzel by Ken Krenzel, written by Harry Lorraine. That's an ebook as well. Marlowe Without Tears by John Rucker-Baumer, ebook. Versatile Card Magic for Revisited by Frank Simon. So that's an actual book this time, so don't worry. There's Daryl's Ambitious Card Omnibus by Daryl Martinez, written by Stephen Minch. That's a physical book. And Card College Volume 4 by Roberto Giobbi. So those are all the resources that you can look at for a tilt. And yeah, just do some more digging, because if you think there's a lot of material in my video, oh man, you're so wrong, because this is just the tip of the iceberg. So there's so much more you can investigate about the tilt. So I actually don't use the tilt that much. I should, but I don't. It's a fun and classic move. There's really not much else I can say about it besides, yeah, it's a fun move. I think I do like it, but you know, I don't know. I kind of grew out of it because I just prefer more mechanically interesting moves. Not to say that tilt is a bad move, but it's just something that I don't really use. But if you're ever like a beginner or any person of any skill level, then you should use the tilt, because it is genuinely a good move. Because as long as you just count off a proper number of cards, so you have like a pinky break below 3 cards, and you slide the card in, now you have the selection at the 4th position. It is genuinely a good move, and I don't know any move that can actually sort of replace it. Maybe a Cull, or maybe Troy Hauser's Troy Hauser's Slipstream. Maybe that can be it, but the external reality is different. But you know, just feel free to experiment with it and just read up more on the tilt. But regardless, that's gonna be it for me. So yeah, stay healthy, stay safe, and see you guys next time.